Hello again, and today's business is to look at Core Studies Section C, which is better known as the Practical Applications sections. It's called Practical Applications as you're applying your psychology to an article that's going to be printed in the exam, usually from a newspaper, and it'll be about 150 to 200 words long. 35 marks available, and just like Section B, there are normally 5 to 7 questions in the section. The kind of things they'll ask you about is to outline and link core studies to the article, outline and link debate or debates, identify psychological themes in the article, of which more later, and then here are the two biggies: applying psychological applications, coming up with some sort of theory to change the situation that's described in the article, and leading that theory to suggestions that could actually be done, and then evaluating those suggestions, and those between them will probably be about over a third of the marks for Section C. So you got this mystery article. What kind of stuff will be in it? Well, as a whole, it'll be anything that can reasonably easily linked to any one of the key themes that you've done. In the past, we've had articles on reliability of memory, helping behaviour, obedience, discrimination, influence on behaviour, particularly media influence on behaviour. One that could come up are brain differences in behaviour. Another thing on YouTube by a guy called Jonathan Evans, who's done a bit of stuff on this, called Section C Exam Article Preparation. He found a really nice article on Kick a Ginger Day that children at a school saw on South Park and copied and acted out.
Anyway, here's the example that we're going to use that I've found and summarised from an article in The Guardian with a link at the bottom. We'll read through it together, pay close attention because you're going to need to give quotes to exemplify links to various bits of psychology.
Anyway, 4 Fijian prison officers seeking asylum after choosing to flee their home country of Fiji for a new life in Australia claimed they'd been ordered to physically mistreat prisoners by the head of the corrections service. They were ordered to beat a colleague as punishment for his work failures. They said the culture of the beating was deeply ingrained in Fijian mentality, but it was still unacceptable in this day and age. They felt they had no option but to obey. If they did not, they were punished themselves. If the man given the orders wasn't present, they would sometimes tell him they had followed his orders by email, but actually didn't do that. The head of the corrections services they are accusing of giving these orders had previously been in jail himself for a violent crime, but was soon released and promoted to his position, and the guards felt that he had been rewarded for his behaviour, so it became the norm. Right, we're going to look at some questions in a minute, but before that I want you to have a little think. What areas of psychology might we apply to this article and why? What core studies might look at issues which are relevant to this article and why? And what debates might you wish to apply to this article and why? Now it's time to pause the video, take a minute and say to yourself, what areas can I link? What core studies can I link? What debates can I link? I'll see you in a minute. Okie dokie then, going from the most to some less obvious possibilities. I thought obviously the social area might be inappropriate because you've got Milgram about obedience and Bocchiaro about obedience, and it's about the influence of other people on behaviours. Similarly, we've got the behaviourist perspective. It talks about the head of the corrections department being rewarded for it by using punishments to try and stop behaviours that are disapproved of in these circumstances happening again. We've got Bandura as the influence of other people in developing aggression. We've got Cheney in terms of rewards increasing behaviours. We've got the developmental approach, which is a little bit less obvious, I'll grant you, but this looks at development of behaviour through being less violent and aggressive to more violent and aggressive, partly through culture, perhaps social learning theory and witnessing other guards doing those things, or through behaviourism. And later on in the course we will look at moral development. And finally, a bit of a stretch, but there's always the biological side of it. Casey showed us that people's ability to restrain themselves from acts was due to the activity of their ventral striatum, but that did change depending on the circumstances that they were. As for the debates, well, we've got obviously nature-nurture. There's that really quite socially sensitive and uncomfortable statement that the beating culture was ingrained in the Fijian psyche. How did it get there? Is it born? Was it and the head of the corrections facilities himself, he was rewarded for violent behaviour, and so it's increased. But was he violent initially? So there's a debate to be had there. Free will and determinism. Was the guards' behaviour determined by the punishments that they received if they didn't do what they were told, by the social pressures that they were under? They felt they had no choice to obey, but they also said that sometimes they didn't obey, so they had some elements of free will in certain areas. Individual and situational explanations are also there. And of course it is socially sensitive. It looks at one culture in a pretty negative way, suggesting there is a violence ingrained. But on the other hand, the guards are whistleblowing. They're trying to do something about it. They're saying it's unacceptable in a modern society. As we've already said, these are the kind of questions that you could be asked about. They can vary from between 2 to 8 marks, which obviously means that the amount you have to write about each one changes, and you have to keep an eye on the number of marks. We're going to do a couple together now. The first is suggest why this article can be placed in the blank area or perspective. It's only 2 marks, so you want something from the area, a key concept in a nutshell, and something specific from the article, which is a quote. So here's my answer to the question: suggest why this article can be placed in the behaviourist area, or in this case perspective. It's saying the behaviourist perspective states that we learn behaviour due to rewards and punishments, which is operant conditioning. And then to link it to the study, I've said the article said that the chief of corrections, who was the man who giving the orders, had previously been jailed for a violent crime but was soon released and promoted. The guards felt he had been rewarded for his behaviour and it became the norm. So there is that link between rewards and behaviour. And now you're going to do a question. Suggest why this article can be placed in the social area. I want something from the social area, a key concept, and then find yourself a quote showing that the presence of other people in the article has influenced behaviour. Take 2 minutes, write your answer, then we'll get on to the next one. Our next question is actually pretty easy, although a bit confusingly asked. As is all too often the case in psychology, the questions are complicated, the answers are obvious, and the question is, in this case, identify 2 psychological issues raised in this article. Support your answer with evidence from the article. And obviously, you're saying to me, what's a psychological issue? It's anything a psychologist may be interested in studying. Have a look at the key themes the studies are paired in. Have a look at the aims of the study. These are the kind of things that psychologists are interested in studying. So in this, a psychological issue may be the power of the urge to be obedient, the influence of authority, the influence of culture, the effect of reward. So in this case, it's 6 marks for 2 separate psychological issues, which is clearly 2 3-mark questions. And so our structure is identify the issue, explain the issue, give evidence or a quote to show where the issue came in the text. And here's my answer. One issue is the influence of punishment on behaviour. Then I explain it. If behaviour is punished, it is less likely to be repeated according to operant conditioning. And then to link that to the article, I've said this is seen in the article as the guards felt that they had no choice to obey, as if they didn't, they were punished. So there you go, 3 marks, easy as. Your turn. You choose an issue, you identify it, you explain it, and you give evidence, a quote from the article. I'll see you in 2 minutes. Simple, huh? The next one's even easier still. Outline a study and explain how it could be linked to this article. 4 marks. It's a doddle. Again, a three-part answer. You outline, briefly describe your study, a couple of marks. You overtly make links from the study to the article by saying who or what in the study is like who or what in the article. Then you give a quote from the article to nail it down. So outline Bocchiaro's study and explain how it could be linked to this article. Bocchiaro's study looked at students' reaction to being asked to perform an unethical task inducing others to participate in a sensory deprivation experiment. It investigated whether they would obey, disobey, or whistleblow. Despite others predicting that they would disobey, 31.9% of them thought that, or whistleblow, 64.5% thought that. In fact, 76.5% obeyed. And I think we've got some fine details. Now we link it to the study. In the article, the guards are like the students being asked to perform an unethical task. And then I've given the quote. They were ordered to beat a colleague up as punishment for his work failures instead of inducing participants in the sensory deprivation task. And the 4 guards seeking asylum in Australia are like the few students who actually whistled. 4 marks. Thank you very much. Now, it's your turn. Your study is outline Cheney's study and explain how it could be linked to the article. 4 marks, 4 minutes. I'll see you then.
Pause me up now and answer this question.
And now for the time you've been waiting for, the 2 biggies. The suggesting an application and the evaluating your suggestions. Here's my question. So using your knowledge of psychology, suggest ways in which the behaviour of prison guards could be improved. To do this, I think we've got to be looking at least 2, if not 3 suggestions. It'd be possible to do it with 1 suggestion, but it would have to be so detailed that it's very unlikely. You identify a theory, first of all, in psychology that leads to a general way that behaviour can be improved or changed, and then you give the detail, who, when, and how. Now, a quick word of warning, these questions aren't always change the behaviour. In the past, it's been make alterations to this study, for instance, but usually they are, okay? And if we're changing behaviour, then we're looking at behaviourism, operant conditioning, classical conditioning, and social learning theory. Is there a way we can use punishment to change behaviour? Is there a way we can use reward to change behaviour? Is there a way we can use role modelling to change behaviour? Of course, there's always things like education, though we link that to psychology perhaps by suggesting. It allows us to change cognitions or use cognitive structures to change behaviours. And I'll give you an example of that. Our old friend Casey suggested that low delayers could be helped to increase their delaying by using cognitive cooling strategies to change their behaviour. So I said I wanted us to identify a theory, lead to a general suggestion to change behaviour, and then give some detail. Who, when, how. I'm doing the first paragraph here, and the theory I'm identifying is social learning theory. And then I'm giving a general concept that this is the idea that role modelling can be demonstrated to the guards and they can learn to copy that behaviour. So far so good, now we've got to get into some specifics. The role model should be someone similar to the guards, so perhaps a senior guard also from Fiji. As they receive their initial training, the senior guard could demonstrate ways to treat prisoners with respect, by agreeing that they can have certain facilities and rights and not responding violently to negative behaviours, but rather explain that if prisoners do not meet standards, a lack of privileges may result. Perhaps they could also demonstrate, just occurred to me, that if instructed to be violent to prisoners, they could turn around and say, thank you for the advice, sir, but I feel this would be a better way to demonstrate it that doesn't abuse their civil rights. This modelling should occur in prisons with real prisoners to make it as realistic as possible, and as it is being done by real senior guards, the trainees may have more respect for them and so be increasingly motivated to repeat the behaviour they have seen. So there's one paragraph. I've identified the theory, I've given a general suggestion, and then I've gone on and given some specifics as best I can. Now it's your turn. Your ideas don't have to be mega practical, but equally just saying something like, oh, shoot the guards if they're bad is obviously not really suitable, even if you find some psychological reasoning behind it, okay? So your turn. I want you to write 2 more short paragraphs following the structure. Identify a theory, goes to a suggestion, and then some detail of who, where, how, etc. And the theories may be operant conditioning punishment, operant conditioning reward. It may be education and changing cognitions and thought processes, etc. Over to you. Talk about it amongst yourselves. Do your best. 2 paragraphs, and then we'll get to the end of it. Yeah, almost there. And finally, evaluate the suggestions you have made using issues and debates you have learned in psychology. This is a bit of a change from previous early years where it was just evaluate the suggestions you made. There was quite a good route to answer it, which again was suggested by that Jonathan Evans guy, which was PPI. Practical problems, psychological evidence, and individual differences in how people might relate. But the problem with that is that if you're looking at practical problems, there's not enough money, there's not enough time, then that in psychology, any idiot can say that, and we're special kinds of idiot, so we got to talk more psychologically. So the question's brought back to the debates. Here's a list of those debates. We need at least 2 separate points of discussion, but while we're discussing those, we would have a range of points that come out of it. I want you to have a little thought about which debates would be handy to evaluate your suggestions. Back in a sec. Okie dokie. These are the debates I think are fairly easy to discuss in terms of when you look at your suggestions in the light of those debates, where the debate suggests that there are good things or bad things or would work or wouldn't work. But how do you go about doing that? Well, as we get towards the end, and these questions are what we call differentiators, those harder and faster rules in terms of structures apply less. But here's what I would definitely do. Outline the debate, because there's some marks here for knowledge as well as application and evaluation. Then link the debate to your suggestion. Something along the lines of, therefore nurture would not support social learning theory, and then you go into a little bit of detail explaining why, if it's genes, then obviously any external influence isn't going to have an effect. Can you throw in any psychology, anything from a study that would support it? And finally, any further comments when you're on a roll and you think, oh, hang on, this is good or that's bad, and these are other things that to do with nature or nurture or individual situational and problems and issues and evidence that might or might not mean a good or bad thing. I've got our first paragraph and it's pretty straightforward. So in red, I've got an outline of the debate. In yellow, I'll link it to the suggestion, and then I say what the consequence of that is. So my first area of evaluation is consider both sides of the nature-nurture debate. In my the nature side of the nature-nurture debate states that all behaviour is due to the genes we are born with, and if this is true, then my suggestion of using conditioning and social learning theory will be ineffective. Effectively, then my suggestions are totally useless, as no amount of rewards and punishments or role modelling will change somebody's genetics. Cases high or low delayers were consistently like that from the age of 4 for 40 years, and no amount of nurture appears to have changed them. Now I'm doing the same but for the other side of the debate, but I haven't coloured this one in. On the other hand, if the nurture side is correct and we are all born a tabula rasa, a blank slate, then the use of conditioning as social learning theory could be really useful. This is because they use environmental influences like role modelling and rewards to influence people in a nurture explanation, and Bandura and Cheney showed it is effective in altering children's behaviour. So that's what I said so far, and to be honest, if I had 2 paragraphs like that, I'd get quite reasonable marks. But if you really want to impress, you can take it on and free flow a little bit. And I've gone on to say, however, there are many forms of influence in nurture, like rewards and punishments, and the threats of armed superiors could have a much greater influence than the extra day off I suggested. I didn't suggest an extra day off. I suggested that as just now as a reward for guards that are doing the right thing, as if you had done it when you wrote your paragraphs. Bear with me. Also, they could be primed to behave in a better or worse way, which may have much more of an effect than modelling good behaviour in initial training. Furthermore, they may not really believe in the performance of the guards who model the behaviour in training, and may see other more negative behaviour being demonstrated when they get their jobs and choose to copy that instead of the role models, because those role models are guards they're working with and are more similar to them and are more powerful. So there I've got one quite extensive paragraph with lots of points, and if you did that again, I think we'd be looking pretty much at top marks. So now your turn. You've had my paragraph. I want you to do a paragraph. You could discuss, you could evaluate your suggestions, our suggestions in terms of free will or determinism. People have free will. They can change, but then they can't be made to change. If it's determined, then it should be changeable, but it could be determined by a range of factors. You may want to discuss whether your suggestions are reductionist and so don't tell the whole story, or holistic and try and consider lots of things but are difficult to control because of that. Are your explanations individual, situational ones in terms of the changes, and what are the implications of these? Ethical considerations: what are the good or bad points ethically about trying to change the behaviours in question? So outline what the debate means, then link the debate to the suggestions, say whether that means the suggestion is good or bad, add any psychological evidence you can think of, and anything else you can go. There you go. This is your chance to shine. You've got 5 questions to finish off. I look forward to seeing what you've done. Bye for now.